might say that Bob Emmons doesn't need an introduction, particularly to this audience, but I want to just say a couple of things because it really is something that I have really looked forward to, because this is a gentleman, we throw around the word Renaissance person a lot. We have a real live example of that in Bob Emmons, university professor, CEO of American and New York Stock Exchange companies, a poet, more recently a sculptor, a philanthropist. But most importantly, I think Bob is someone that throughout his life has opened doors to folks, young people, people in midlife crises or changes. And now he has, I think, written a very important, it may be a small, slender volume, but it is lyrical, it is important, and it addresses something that I think is so relevant to the work of a community foundation, and it really internationally, as we are entering an era where the period from 65 or so on, which used to be about, I think, packing your bags, you might say, and getting by and putting your affairs in order. Well, now it's a whole wonderful opportunity to do so much more. And so that's where we begin. So again, I mentioned a Renaissance person. I mentioned some of those. How do you explain all these diverse interests that you've had, Bob?
Well, I have always been a very curious person. I've always been interested in what might be behind the next door, or what would it be like to do that, or could I do that? Am I up to it? And then I said, well, the only way I'll ever know is if I go ahead and do it. And so I reinvented myself a number of times. Chris once said that she had been to 5 retirement parties, and that was enough. And we've traveled a road that's been a very interesting road. I know sometimes Chris is, when I say I want to go off and do something, well, Chris is always there, which is wonderful to have a wife who's that way. And like when we went to the early part of this year, when we went to Italy to live in Italy for 3 months while I did a sculpture tutorial at the Florence Academy of Art. And that people will say to me, well, how did you do that? Where did you get the idea to do that sort of thing? And where did you get up the courage to go and do something so dramatically different at this point in your life? And I guess I've always been a risk taker. My poor mother, who lived through the Depression, every time I would go off in a new direction, she would be so worried. Oh my goodness, she said, Bobby, you're already a vice president. She said, what? You're going to give that up and go off and do something else? And she said, what if it doesn't work out? How will you take care of your family? And that's just the way she was. And having a risk taker and an entrepreneur for a son was something that she had a lot of trouble with. And she always celebrated when I was a success, but when I was ready to move on, she was very nervous about that.
Before we continue with the theme, because you mentioned courage, and I want to stay with that for a moment, but just taking a step back, let's start with the beginning, the title of the book. Some people here might know why you named it 66,000 Sunrises. Why?
I would like to say that I came up with this all by myself, but that was not the case. I was looking at some financial wealth management advertisement for the Prudential company, and they had an ad that was was 6,000 sunrises, and how to get the most out of life as you enter your retirement years. And the whole theme was that if you retired at 65 today, you, in all probability, could live to be 83 or 84, perhaps even more, and you would experience 6,000 sunrises. So the question was, how can you take and maximize the wonderful extended life that you've been given? Because, you know, you did something that was very interesting when you did one of the blurbs for my book. Because one of the things that you pointed out here is that you said that this book, you know, deals with people who are at a point in their life where they're shutting down. They're kind of waiting for the end instead of getting out there and trying to do much more with this extended life that's been given to you. And that's really, you know, where it all came together for me, because I saw that ad. I really liked the metaphor of the 6,000 sunrises. And then I started to evolve and write around that. And I had, you know, some wonderful support. Is Charles Donald here? I didn't see him tonight. Charles was an editor, and he helped me from that standpoint. And Karen, who's been my assistant for 55 years. And,
But you're only 30
it only seems like that to her. But she's been great, and Chris, of course, has always been so supportive. And you know, when I go off on one of these, you know, tangents, why she just kind of steps aside and you know, watches where I'm going. But with the book, it was great because Charles was a help, and he gave me a couple of stories that I used in the book, and he did some work from editorial standpoint that was very helpful to me.
And I know in talking with you that it was more that prompted the book than your own experience and the promise of engagement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you had noticed that there were really a lot of barriers that people put up to not taking those chances in this period of life. Talk a little bit about what you observed, and because I think that's really what prompted you to want to write a book like this.
Well, people go out of their way to come up with reasons why they're not going to do something. And some of those reasons are easily surmounted, you know, some of those obstacles. And so one of the things I did in this book is there are some exercises in here.
No, it's a
And
workbook.
so what I was trying to do really was to produce a workbook. And in one of the first chapters, I say, please write in this book. Because the whole idea is that people should write and they should make some notes as they go through. But there's a section in the book where there are 10 reasons why you cannot do something. And then there are 10 answers as to why you can. And I've had some of the people who read the book who found that to be really helpful, because there are ways to get around these barriers to change. And one of the exciting things about the world that we live in today is that it is changing, and it's changing constantly. And what we can do is we can be defeated by change, or we can embrace it. And when we embrace change, then things start to happen, and our life can become much more exciting.
I know that one of the themes that really struck me was particularly, maybe this, at least historically, was more about men, but that's changing, is one's identity being so identified with work that when the CEO or the vice president or the entrepreneur leaves that, they don't know how to reinvent themselves and will go into a shell.
Well, I would like to say that someone is calling me to deal with that. This is is so great. And,
It's Ryan's ring.
Ryan, I'm in the middle of a lovely event tonight, and we have 60 people gathered to listen to me talk about my book. And they want to know if you'd like to be on speaker. I'll talk to you later.
Perfect.
Advertisement.
Let me deal with it properly. Thank God it wasn't the Santa Barbara Symphony.
So the identity of work and what happens after that, and why that's such a, in a sense, a difficult barrier for many people.
Well, we get all wrapped up if we've given a number of years to a career, and we get all wrapped up with it. And you also, I really do have to say, there are a couple of guys who work with me here, and they were, when we were working together as a team. And there are some perks that are pretty substantial when you're in a position of working with a corporation that's a public corporation. And giving up those perks sometimes can be a real challenge. And also there's a lot of acclaim that people deliver to you. And sometimes it's earned, but sometimes it comes to you because of the position. And so you get used to that. And leaving it behind becomes a challenge. And so many people, they have nothing else but their job. And so when it comes time for them to step away from their job, they have this great sense of leaving something behind. And what they're going to hasn't been articulated. And so one of the things that people can do is, as they go through this process of becoming a senior and going through the aging process, and it comes time for retirement, they can think ahead. And you know, if you're 55 years old, you know that at some point in time you're going to step aside and we'll start doing something different. And that's one of the things that I always did. I always had all kinds of things that I was going to go to. And so when I finished one phase of my life, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do next, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to experience. And so it was just stepping from one place into another place, which was equally attractive and interesting to me.
And many of those times you followed your passion. And in the book you talk about passion being the basis of accomplishment. I really liked that concept. How do people discover their passions and move on them? And what is the role of community involvement in all of this?
Well, I had the chance to speak to the California League of Community Foundations. And one of the questions that came to me from the audience was, we have people out there who have never found their passion. We have people who are in our communities and they don't have a passion. And so if you say follow your passion, they don't have one. And I said at that time, well, that's the role of the Community Foundation. The Community Foundation can help people find their passion. They can help people find the kinds of things that will become important to them and that will actually add dimension and flavor and interest to their lives. So there's a challenge for you.
Exactly. And it's a growing market. You know, chapter 8 was one of my favorites because it was very personal. It was about reintroducing yourself, your new self, to your family, and how that's not always easy. People have you in a box, and they want you to stay there. And as one reinvents themselves, it's not always an easy thing. And talk a little bit about that.
Well, the key as you're going through a period where you're making some changes in your life is to try to bring your family along with it. And so that your family understands why you're doing it, what it means to you, and the reasons behind this new direction that you might be taking. And a story. I was having lunch with a good friend who was president of a bank. No banks here in town. And he seemed agitated, and I said, something's going on with you. You don't seem like you're in a good place. And he said, oh, I got family problems. I said, well, what's going on, kid? He said, oh, he said, my mother and father are building a new house. I said, well, what's wrong with that? He said, they're 84 years old.
Yes.
And they're building a new house. And I said, well, what's the matter with that? Well, it's 40 miles away. And they're out there and they're building this house and it's 40 miles away, and I worry about them, and they didn't tell me about this. They didn't tell me they were going to do this, I found out from another friend who told me, how's your parents doing with the new house they were building? And he said, it's really troubling. And I said, have you talked to him about it? No. And I said, go talk to him about it. Find out what's going on. Tell them how wonderful it is that they're building this house, and how if you can be helpful to them in any way, please let me know. Yeah, I guess I could do that. So, about 2 weeks later, I get a bottle of Dom Perignon from him. And it turns out that his parents were building this house for their grandchildren. The whole character of the event changed. Because what they were doing is building a place that they could enjoy. It happened to be at the beach, okay, that they could enjoy for the rest of their lives. But it was primarily so that the family would have this wonderful place to share memories with them when they were gone. What happened here was that he had put his mother and his father in a box. And he wanted them in that box because then he, frankly, had power over them, and he could control the situation. And when they behaved outside that box, he felt very threatened. He felt like he couldn't do his job if they weren't close by. And isn't that fascinating? That's one of my favorite stories, because it just shows what can happen with families where you have stereotypes as far as the family is concerned. Everybody is expected to do the same thing, and if you do something different, then everybody in the family feels threatened because you're doing something different, and it's something that's outside of the box that they have placed you in.
Yeah, and it also goes to that, you talk about power and independence. And there's a line in the book about how we must respect independence of folks as they get older, and how important that is to their well-being. In fact, just to share a very quick anecdote, my father is 89, and he still drives. And if he didn't drive, his life would be very limited. But the whole family has decided he can't drive anymore. He hasn't. He's a good driver, and he's in good health. And it's these artificial barriers, I think, we put on folks, and not realize that that is a real important thing to him, as long as he can do it. Before we go on, or as we go on, one of the great things about this book is that it's a workbook. It's a dialectic, but it's also full of beautiful poetry. And I'm wondering if, from time to time during this interview, if you would share one or two of them with us.
I am prepared. Side by side. They have been together for too many years, survivors. Their journey traversed the earth, exploring new lands, then circling back, intent on seeking out what might have been missed. Following primitive rivers into the depths of Amazon green, running across the sands of abandoned beaches, discovering lost islands, always adventures, pursuing, aside old failures, always finding new dreams, side by side.
Wonderful. You mentioned before, in passing, that you went to Italy to study sculpture. And you said it, so I'm not trading on any secrets, and everyone knows here, it was just around your 80th birthday. And you used the word courage. And at first I said, what does courage have to do with this? But you talked so eloquently at your birthday party and last week in the interview about why it would take courage to take up sculpting in a serious way in your 80th decade.
Well, my time as a sculptor was relatively limited. My friend Demetrius got me involved last year in doing some sculptures and working with me and preparing me for the possibility that I would pick up being a sculptor and going forward with it. And so when I have another friend who is an artist and is the director of the Florence Academy in Florence, heard that I was doing this, he said, well, why don't you come to Florence? And I'll arrange for Rob Bowden, who is the head of the sculpture department at the Florence Academy, to do a private tutorial with you. And I said, gee, that would be wonderful. And then my throat got tight, and because I was called out. He said, Jay, okay, you want to be a sculptor? Here's the next step. And then we went and we bought tickets to go over there, and then we rented Chris did a great job. We rented an apartment in Florence. But right up to about 2 weeks before I left, I had a panic attack, in terms of what am I doing? Where am I going? I don't even speak Italian. I'm going to go over and I'm going to live in Italy, and I'm going to take on this is an incredible risk. I've always loved sculpture, and we have a sculpture collection in our house. And it's always been an important part of the art world, which is really very special for Chris and I. And when I'll pass a piece of sculpture, I'll often take my hand and run it over the piece of sculpture. So I have that tactile reference to it. And that's what some of my friends, that's what Dan Graves had seen. And he said, no, he said, you're going to be a natural. So I went over there. Okay. And we got started on it. And the first week, we had a car, and Chris drove me to the sculpture studio for the program. And then the second week, I started taking a bus. And I take a bus every morning, and I met all kinds of interesting people. About the third week, there was an older woman who decided that I was a very interesting man, And so I had to deal with that. I also found some other interesting things, like there's a sign on the bus that said "No pets allowed." Okay, and every day a guy got on with his dog. Okay, and he gave the bus driver a euro. And that's how you get around those signs. I was just fascinated by it, you know, just for €1, and then the sign came down, and that was it. He was on his own. But it was a great experience, frankly, to do things like riding the bus, going to the grocery store, and when you're in a place for almost 3 months, you really start to live there in the full sense. And we've taken a lot of trips to Italy, and fortunately Chris speaks fluent Italian, and so that makes it awfully easy. And but we have been to Italy, I don't know, maybe 20 times.
But embodied in that story is risk-taking, is stretching yourself, reinvention, adventure, even physical exercise, doing all of that, all key important things. I'd like to touch on one more topic, and then I think we should have some questions from the audience and maybe read another poem or two. It's about, you dare to talk about a subject that is often, people don't go near, spirituality, and how particularly people in this age group can bring great wisdom and thoughtfulness to that. I distinctly remember the Santa Barbara Foundation last year, the board of directors, Bob was still with us, did a retreat. And it was to discover or to sharpen our mission and all kinds of very good recommendations. And then you raised your hand, and again, maybe our most serious business person on the board said, how about compassion as a guiding principle for the foundation, helping those most vulnerable. And I'd just like you to comment a little bit more about where spirituality fits here and how, maybe particularly at this time of one's life, you can bring those things out, and it can be of great value to organizations and your community.
I have been so impressed with the younger generation in terms of how they find spirituality and where they find it. My generation typically found it in a church or a synagogue, and that the formal religion played such an important part in our lives. But I find that younger people find spirituality in helping their fellow man. And it's fascinating to me because they are willing to reach out, they are willing to, if they see someone or a family who is having difficulty, they're willing to step in and try to help those people who require something. And so it's spirituality that doesn't need a formal religion. It's spirituality that goes much more beyond that. When I was growing up, my mother, who was a spectacular woman, we lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, and it was during the latter years of the Depression. And my mother got to be known as a place where you could get something to eat. And so we often had people coming up on our back porch and knocking on the door, and my mother would always, come up with something. And always topped off, she loved to bake, and so it was always topped off by a piece of pie. The other thing that she did, which was real interesting, she was very concerned about preserving their dignity. And so she always found a job for them to do so they felt like they had earned their meal. And it would be sometimes, here, take this bushel basket, go out and pick those apples out in the orchard. You know, the front yard is just a mess. Take this rake and rake up all those leaves and so on in the front yard and put them in a bag and so on. And that's how that was a very spiritual kind of thing. She was looking out for her fellow man. She was preserving their dignity, and it was wonderful to grow up in that kind of environment. And my mother said to me, you know, just remember one thing, Bobby. And I said, what's that? She said, you have to leave this world and this earth a better place for your having passed through. Now, probably at least 2/3 of the people here had their mother probably say something like that to them. You know. But with me, it stuck. And I always felt like if I could do something to help someone, you know, it was certainly something that I wanted to do and I wanted to make a priority.
Well, it sounds like she didn't just say it, she modeled it.
Oh, yeah.
And
during the time, you know, when, you know, we had, it was an interesting time because the town existed on barter.
Mm-hmm.
There was a rayon plant, and the rayon plant closed down during the Depression. And so the people in this small town, you know, I think maybe only half of them had jobs, and the rest of the people, and, you know, I can remember my older brother and I often talk the story about taking a can of applesauce or a can of pears to the Pastime Theater in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, because there was no money in the town, and so they ran the movies, but everybody would bring jars of fruit and vegetables and so on in, and that's how the kids got to go and see the movies. And it was a wonderful experience, you know, to have, and I was very fortunate that I've had that kind of background that laid a foundation for the life that I was able to lead. And then I had so many people be kind to me along the way, and so many people, mentors, who went out of their way and to make my life better. And I have always had a great appreciation for that.
Before we take a question or two or three from the audience, share another poem. Anyone, just make it Winter Promise. It's on page 10.
Do you think there might be a favorite here? Winter Promise. The snow began at midnight, falling on your shining face, whitening your hair as you walked bent to the wind, transforming you into an old woman. Your beauty still shines, an image, a glimpse, perhaps of years to come. It makes me smile. I want to grow old with you at my side, to walk the years away, through many snows, to have your shining face warm by frosty winds.
Yeah.
Wonderful. When I first read the book, I ran home and read it to my lovely wife.
And I even got a kiss from this away from
Questions of Bob about the book? Gary?
Bob, I'm curious, when you pursued some of the interests that you had, did you have an inkling that you had some ability or talent in that area? Or was the motivation that you were interested in pursuing it, or was it some combination?
Well, I've always had, you know, an inordinate amount of self-confidence, to be perfectly honest. And you know, that's always had a place. And so when my mother was protesting when I was about to go off and do something new and different, why that kind of always took over. And And then, you know, I was, every step along the way, I had someone who was a mentor who prepared me for the next step. And the role of mentors is something that's so incredibly important and is a key part of leadership. And as Ken well knows, that in his leadership work, finding mentors for people is such a key element of the potential success that would be unleashed if these people could find a mentor who would help them and get them started and move in the right direction. And, you know, one of my favorites, early on in my life, I worked for Baskin Robbins, and Butch Baskin was my mentor, and he was an incredible guy, and he thought I could do anything. And how wonderful it was to work for somebody who thought I could do anything, you know. And he constantly was throwing things at me where I was stretched, expecting me to go in and clean up somebody else's mess. And, you know, where I might have been hesitant to do something like that. But Butch, you know, Bob, you can do it. Just get back to me with how we should deal with this. In fact, you don't even have to get back to me. Just do it. What a wonderful message. Huh? Very fortunate. Okay.
So Bob, you talked about the importance of mentors. Did you have any particularly important mentors to you in aging?
I guess I have an interesting take on that, because I have never associated with aging. My perspective is a relatively youthful perspective, and that's what I've kind of carried with me. And so, you know, even admitting to people that I was 80 years old, do you know how tough that was? Oh my goodness. You know, I've been 73 for 10 years. And so, you know, being able to take that step, you know, where I could, you know, start saying, well, gosh, I am 80 years old. You know? That was a big challenge in and of itself. But one of the things that I encourage is for seniors to associate with young people. Quite often, they associate with older people, and they lose something that's very important. My brother Bill, who is 89 years old, teaches a research class on the computer for third graders in a parochial school in Sarasota, Florida. Okay. Now, Bill was the vice president of a corporation and was very successful. And when we talk, he always talks about some of the experiences that he's had working with these third grade kids. And they keep him alive, they keep him interested, they keep him working with young people. He's learning more about the computer since he started teaching the computer to these kids. You know, what a wonderful experience to have. So one of the keys, I think, as far as aging is concerned, is not to stay young, per se, but to continue to associate with the younger people, because I think it adds something to your life that's very special. But, you know, I will come back on that. In the book, I talk about 4 people who I admire. And they are people who have gone into their super senior years, and they're continuing to do things, to be interesting people, to be fighters. And it's, you know, I have great respect for them. One of them just happens to be sitting right here.
She didn't shut down.
But Barnaby Conrad, how many people know Barnaby Conrad? Barnaby is just, health is catching up with him, unfortunately. And the same thing with Jack Liddell. Jack Liddell is, Barnaby and Jack are both 89 years old, but they have continued to do interesting things. You know, Barnaby had a novel published 2 years ago, and had an exhibition of his art 5 years ago, all during his 80s. Eris Demetrius is another. Eris is you know, still flying all over the world doing major sculptures in places like Asia and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and here across the United States. But Eris is an interesting story. If you know Eris, you'll know his work involves working with large sheets of bronze and taking those large sheets of bronze and making figures of them, often geometric figures. Eris found it very difficult because of the physical aspects of that work. You know, moving these big sheets of bronze around and cutting them and going through this whole process. And so the physical demands were starting to be too much for him. Eris did not give up. He found a foundry that he could actually send digital images to. And the foundry would then produce his work. And he would fly back and visit them 2 or 3 times and oversee the production of the work. But basically it started out as a digital image that he had created on the computer, and then that digital image was sent to a foundry in North Carolina. And Eris went back and forth using the computer and actually producing some beautiful works of art. And as Eris said to me, Bob, he said, I can do this till I'm 90. And I said, boy, you can, Eris. You know, this may be the best 10 years of your life. And he said, you think so? And I said, absolutely. So you have those people who are not necessarily my personal mentors, but they're people who I admire greatly for how they live their lives.
Maybe one more? Norm.
I don't actually have a question for Bob, but a comment. Bob and I have known each other for a long time. We shared similar business experiences over 25 years that we've probably known each other. And I must tell you that he has discovered the way to reinvent himself, which is awesome to me because I've asked him about that many times as I struggle with that problem, by having great intellectual curiosity and compassion and understanding of so many things that are so critical. And for that, he, in my eyes, is an enormous personality.
Thank you. On behalf of
In the words of Clint Eastwood, you've made my day.
Well, it is a Tuesday night, and we know that you know, folks probably want to get home or on to, in knowing this town, probably another event. So I'd like to thank Bob for being Bob, as Norm just put it, and being an inspiration. You know, I think that the one thing that I've interjected when I've talked about this book is that it's not just for people who have made it financially and may find it more easily, the time and the opportunities. As I was reading this book, I think it's something that anyone can take inspiration from. And when I was speaking with Andrea about it, we agreed at almost any age. It's a wonderful contribution. I'm glad we had this conversation so we learn more about the book, but also more about you. I'd like to say in closing, before I think we'll get maybe one more poem, that each of you can get a signed copy tonight. Bob has donated the books, and any books that we sell, all proceeds will go to the foundation. And so what we're saying is one free copy tonight, but if you'd like multiple copies, we can arrange to get them for you. And we have some extras tonight that are $12.95. If you go to Amazon.com, and it's right there. And if you're not one of those who likes to use the internet, contact the foundation at any time. We'll arrange to get you copies. I think it'd make a nice holiday gift. Or for Gary, who's running a wonderful organization called the Center for Successful Aging. Might be a good addition to your repertoire as well. So again, thank you so much for coming. And let's end with
Okay.
and this time you really can't choose anyone.
This one is called Celebration. Let's celebrate life and find our freedom with the exaltation of knowing ourselves through each other. Help me touch the sun, and I'll share with you fresh meadows at Yosemite, tall redwoods and wild blueberries, cold mountain streams in Oregon. Help me swallow the ocean, and I'll share with you quiet anchorages at Santa Cruz, raindrops on port windows, billowing, warm spinnaker rainbows. Help me catch the eagle, and I'll share with you lazy summer afternoons in Kent, antiques and polished silver, tea and soft string quartets. Come celebrate life and cover yourself with today's joy. Unlike brothers Sartre and Camus, we'll plan for great tomorrows.
So nice.
Let me see if I have just one more.
Please.
This is from Italy. Tuscan morning. The sun awakened to a lavender day and raised a wary eye, then blinked a yellow sky. The Tuscan roof tiles far below sent their orange reflections blazing across the cold morning. The hillside vineyards reached out for the day's warm caress as the bells of San Gregorio pealed out in joyous rapture. Once again, God had given his blessing to his chosen ones.